No, this is not a top sheet. It's called fashion. Was Prince Harry's stalker story to cancel out Meghan Markle's? Well, stalker story.
Was actually laughing about during the Balenciaga show. It's not good.
At one point, she sat on the front row and a model tripped.
And we saw all the photographs of Meghan Markle in Paris at Fashion Week with her.
She flew to Paris for a comeback. She left with whispers, memes, and a car ride nobody could explain. That's not drama. That's the headline nobody could contain. From the very first flash of the cameras outside that Balenciaga show, it looked like the perfect reset. A duchess stepping onto Parisian pavement like she owned it. Heels sharp, chin high, white on cream on white, style to suggest purity, power, inevitability. On the surface, it screamed dominance. It screamed, I'm back. But inside that room, inside that front row, the temperature dropped so fast you could almost see it in the air.
Meghan Markle just made her Paris Fashion Week debut by stepping into the Paris Fashion.
She walked in polished, composed, completely camera ready. But the second she crossed that invisible line from outside spectacle to inside reality, something shifted. And the people who were actually in that room felt it. No warm cheek kisses. No sudden orbit forming around her. No editors scrambling for proximity. Just space. Just distance. Just that quiet, calculating pause that happens when a room is deciding whether it wants you and the answer is already forming. There's a brutal difference between being looked at and being received. She was looked at from every angle, studied, measured, assessed, but she was not pulled in. And in fashion, that silence is louder than applause. Photographers did their job, but without hunger, without aggression. It felt procedural, not electric. Editors who usually chase relevance like oxygen stayed planted in their seats. And in a world where proximity is currency, staying seated is a statement.
A girl, you know, if a 44-year-old woman can be called a girl, none other than Meghan Markle.
Body language told the real story. Shoulders angled away. Conversations that didn't open. People carefully deciding how close was too close. This wasn't shyness. It wasn't coincidence. It was a collective calculation. Because Paris Fashion Week is not a casual environment. It is one of the most image-obsessed, strategically choreographed arenas on the planet. Every seat, every nod, every arm draped around a shoulder means something. And what that room communicated quietly and in unison was restraint. She came expecting cameras to explode and the industry to embrace. Instead, she got watched, not celebrated, observed, not crowned. And before the show even wrapped, something uglier started moving through the backstage corridors. The chatter wasn't about Hemland. It wasn't about the collection. It was about her, specifically about something far more personal. And when multiple insiders repeat the same detail separately in a room trained to protect its own discretion, that's when you know the rumor has weight. The whispers were about hygiene, about scent, about the way she allegedly smelled in close quarters. Not vague cruelty, specific commentary. One person described it as cheap perfume layered over stress. That's not a random insult. That's someone who was close enough to register it and uncomfortable enough to talk later. Another account said the glam team looked exhausted, like they were firefighting something invisible but escalating, spraying, adjusting, managing. And then that brutal joke circulated, you can't fix that. In a room where image is oxygen, that kind of rumor doesn't fade. It sticks. Scandals can be spun. Outfits can be forgotten. But hygiene whispers, they attach themselves to your name in a way that lingers. While cameras outside captured her poised and glowing, inside the energy had already pivoted. By the time the final look hit the runway, the collection was background noise. The conversation had collapsed into one topic, her. And not the triumphant narrative she flew into stage. Then came the detail that insiders clocked instantly. The outfit. The pieces weren't gifted couture. They weren't custom-fitted declarations of allegiance from the house. There were borrowed samples, tags still attached, minimal tailoring, no evidence of a brand staking its identity on her presence. That to outsiders, that sounds minor. To fashion insiders, it's everything. Gifted couture says chosen. It says claimed. Borrowed samples say temporary, transactional, tolerated. When a house believes in you, they invest. They send teams. They adjust fabrics to your exact posture. They make you feel inevitable. Borrowed pieces with a Monday morning return, that sends a message too. And one stylist whisper traveled fast. Balenciaga didn't crown her. They tolerated her that in front of cameras, she maintained composure flawlessly, smiling, chin lifted, carrying herself like she owned the narrative. But backstage, the reading was different. It didn't look like someone reclaiming space. It looked like someone working overtime to project belonging in a room that hadn't fully extended it. Then the night detonated in a way nobody predicted. That after the show, word spread that her car passed through the Alma tunnel. The tunnel. the exact location where Princess Diana lost her life. Instantly, everything else, the cold front row, the borrowed couture, the backstage whispers, got eclipsed. The explanation came fast. She didn't know. It was the quickest route. Pure geography. Nothing deliberate. But that explanation collided with a public memory that was far too detailed to ignore. Accounts resurfaced of her studying Diana's funeral footage repeatedly, of books about Diana marked and memorized, of a fascination that had long been described as deep and deliberate. So when people heard she didn't know the tunnel, disbelief exploded, not mild confusion. Shock. TikTok edits appeared within hours, cutting her car ride against archival Diana footage. The contrast felt heavy, loaded, impossible to ignore. Twitter fractured into factions. Bold coincidence or calculated symbolism? One sentence went viral and refused to slow down. It's one thing to admire Diana. It's another to cosplay her tragedy that line didn't just sting. It reframed the entire week. Suddenly, Paris didn't look like a fashion reset. It looked like another chapter in a pattern people were now scrutinizing. A repeated attempt to draw parallels that never fully closed the gap that supporters of Diana reacted emotionally. Comment sections filled with something deeper than gossip. It felt protective, personal. And then came the question that gathered thousands of reactions in hours. If Harry openly grieves that tunnel, how does it become a photographed backdrop? That question didn't fade. It multiplied. Because the more comparisons were made, the more the contrast sharpened. Diana's warmth, Diana's instinctive authenticity, set against something that critics described as strategy. And strategy became the word floating through fashion circles, not presence, not influence. Strategy that then another layer resurfaced. For years, she had positioned herself as a victim of media weaponization, drawing direct parallels to Diana, warning that history could repeat itself. That narrative generated real sympathy globally, but insiders started pointing out something sitting in plain sight. The most haunting images from Diana's final hours were aired by CBS, the same network she and Harry chose for their explosive primetime interview. The same platform trusted with their most personal grievances. The question moved through media circles quietly but persistently. How do you position yourself against media exploitation while partnering with the exact network that broadcast those images? A Hollywood publicist summed it up in a line that caught fire. Authenticity sells. Hypocrisy kills. And as Paris continued unfolding, scrutiny widened. Humanitarian speeches re-examined. Messaging questioned. Staff accounts resurfaced. The shift wasn't backstage anymore. It was visible that designers who normally compete for celebrity proximity appeared elsewhere, not confrontationally, just consistently unavailable. A photographer who'd covered years of Fashion Week said he had never seen a Duchess stand alone in a lobby that long without an orbit-forming images hit the internet. Comparisons followed instantly. Rihanna wrapped in couture with the house visibly behind her. Zendaya pulled close by Valentino like chosen royalty. Kim embraced by Balenciaga's creative team like a true collaboration. And then her, alone in borrowed pieces. Hashtag stuck because they were visual. Direct. Hashtag empty chair energy. Hashtag borrowed couture. Paris does not reward pretense. A French editor wrote, clothes must fit the spirit, not just the body. And that verdict felt final that by day 3, the shift wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't coded in body language or whispered between stylists leaning against backstage mirrors. It was out in the open and it was cold. Designers who normally compete for visibility around a high-profile guest were suddenly unavailable. Not dramatically, not loudly, just consistently somewhere else. Meetings running long, conversations already in progress, smiles that didn't quite extend into invitations. And in an industry that is obsessed with optics, that kind of repeated absence is not accidental. It is deliberate distance by the veteran photographer, someone who has covered every major show for years, said he had never seen a Duchess stand alone in a lobby for that long without an orbit forming. And that word orbit is everything. In fashion, when you are embraced, people gravitate. They lean in. They want to be seen beside you because being seen beside you elevates them too. But when no orbit forms, when no gravitational pull takes hold, that says something sharper than a snub ever could. The images spread instantly. Comparison posts flooded every platform. Rihanna wrapped in couture with an entire house visibly aligned behind her. Zendaya pulled close by Valentino like a chosen muse. Kim Kardashian surrounded by Balenciaga's creative team like a collaboration made official. And then Meghan Markle standing alone in in borrowed samples posture perfect, but the space around her unmistakably wide. The captions practically wrote themselves. The internet is ruthless when visuals line up that cleanly. One French editor published a line that circulated fast: Paris does not reward pretense. Clothes must fit the spirit, not just the body. In fashion language that isn't commentary, that's a verdict. And the word verdict lingered. Then came the murmurs that other celebrities had quietly been advised to keep their distance. No official memos, no public declarations, just careful positioning. Because in moments like this, association becomes risk. And risk is something major brands avoid instinctively. Nobody wanted to be photographed too close. Not right now. Not while the narrative was spiraling. What truly signaled the shift, though, was something more subtle and far more damaging. Some of her loudest defenders, people who had publicly supported her through previous controversies, began to go quiet. Or worse, began asking questions out loud. One post that gained enormous traction didn't attack her. It simply said, maybe the people who had doubts from the beginning were seeing something the rest of us weren't. That wasn't rage. That was reconsideration. And when reconsideration starts among your own supporters, momentum slips in a way that is painfully hard to reverse. Because this stopped being about a runway show. It stopped being about a tunnel drive. It became about a widening gap between projected image and perceived reality. The smile remained polished. The posture stayed composed. But the reception was not matching the performance. After the show wrapped, insiders claimed her team scrambled to secure follow-up meetings to turn Paris into opportunity before the dust settled. Calls made, doors knocked, but the mood had shifted. One insider reportedly told Page Six, nobody wants to be the one to take that risk. Not after Paris. And that quote traveled because it captured the industry temperature perfectly. Risk. That was the new label hovering around her presence. Online, where the wave didn't slow. Hashtag Paris Exposed trended for 3 straight days. Not hours. Days. Memes multiplied. Clips looped. Every image dissected frame by frame. When internet culture locks onto a narrative with that many visual receipts, it doesn't let go quickly. The phrase "return by Monday" attached itself to every borrowed couture joke and refused to fade. Meanwhile, the larger context sharpened. Spotify had already cooled its partnership. Netflix had scaled back. No major new global brand deals appeared on the horizon. Suddenly, Paris didn't feel like an isolated fashion misfire. It felt like a signal flare other industries were quietly observing. A French columnist wrote something that summed up the sting. Paris forgives scandal, but it never forgives imitation. And that line echoed because imitation is the one accusation that strikes directly at authenticity. And authenticity is the currency she has long claimed as her strength. The final irony is that she did become the story, just not the triumphant comeback narrative that the flashing lights outside initially suggested. The city gave her attention. It gave her analysis. It gave her viral dominance. But it did not give her embrace that Paris is famously unforgiving when it senses effort without ease. Trying too hard is the cardinal sin. And that is the critique that echoed most consistently, that the performance felt visible, that the strategy felt visible, that the positioning felt visible. In a culture that worships effortless presence, visible effort reads as calculation. She arrived expecting a glamorous reset. She left with a layered debate trailing behind her across continents. The fashion crowd moved on to the next show, the next muse, the next moment. But the conversation around her lingered longer than the runway lights. Because in the end, this wasn't just about clothes or tunnels or rumors. It was about perception, about whether the image projected can withstand sustained scrutiny from rooms that trade in perception as their highest art form. And in Paris, perception is everything that if this story shifts again, it won't happen quietly. It never does.